Hello, good evening to everyone. I'm Dr. Philip Macmillan. I have been focused on COVID and COVID autoimmunity since early 2020. Many of my predictions about the patterns of COVID and diseases that would emerge have been largely correct. In this process, I have been interviewing experts from across the world over this period of time, and I have learned so much by talking to people before interviews and after interviews and during interviews. And as that process has evolved, it has helped me to see the light about many of the challenges that we face for the future. And so today I have with me two experts who have faced or who understand some of the issues around scientific censorship. And I've brought them with me here, and we're going to have an open discussion with regards to what we think is happening now, where we are, and what the future is. So without further ado, Amitav, do you mind giving us a quick introduction of yourself?
Good evening, Phillips, and good evening to the audience. I am Professor Amitabh Banerjee. I have been an epidemiologist in the armed forces, and after that, I had a long academic career of almost 20 years as professor in community medicine and epidemiology. I retired last year, and I am continuing my academic at my own pace academic career as a professor emeritus of the same institution where I served as a professor, that is DY Patil Medical College, Pune. So that's about
Wonderful.
all.
Go ahead.
And I am also editor in chief of Medical Journal of DY Patil Vidyapeeth, which is an international journal indexed in Scopus and other indexing bodies. So I have still continuing as editor in chief for the past 12 years. So that gives me experience in field epidemiology, in academics, and in scientific journals also.
Wonderful. And Sam, what about you?
Hi, Philip. Hi, Amitav. Good evening to you all. Well, I'm originally from Belgium, living in India now. I know Professor Amitav. I got to know him in the last few weeks and months. My background: physiotherapy, osteopathy. Studied public health and epidemiology. That was also my research background. Wrote an open letter in August 2020, 3 months before the Great Barrington Declaration, in which I also proposed a focused protection and was back then a senior lecturer and head of research in health sciences at 2 university colleges, and was dismissed in February 21 at both my institutes after being put against state-appointed experts in a Brussels television live debate, in which I questioned primarily the fact that the vaccines wouldn't stop transmission. They claimed it would. I also had moral doubts on vaccinating children because we didn't have any decent data on these children. And I also stated why green passes, QR codes, or whatever it's called in every country, wouldn't work. But that was the end of my career. So I got dismissed, censored, and more or less ridiculized in the media for weeks, months even. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Amitav. Before we get into the discussion, Amitav, what I wanted you to do is just give us a quick update, since you're right on the ground and it's occurring in your region, about what is happening with Guillain-Barré syndrome in that Pune region of India, just in case this becomes an important trend for us to follow.
Yeah, Philip, this is something of a mystery. As we know, it's a very rare condition. It's a 1 in 1 lakh. It's an autoimmune disease where the nerves are attacked due to antibodies cross reaction, either maybe triggered by some infection or some other toxin. Mostly it is infection like in Pune, they are suspecting Campylobacter jejuni, which has been associated with Guillain-Barré. But what is What is mysterious is that there are suddenly large number of cases. Even if it is Campylobacter jejuni, it's not a new pathogen. It is there since ages, and water contamination has been known. Outbreaks have been occurring in our country as it occurs everywhere. But there is no such clustering of Guillain-Barré syndrome in a small time. I mean, temporal clustering, the time distribution, and so it's something appears to be some common source contamination. And another thing we have to keep in mind is Pune is a very had a very heavy onslaught of arboviral viral infections, mosquito-borne Aedes mosquito, that is dengue, chikungunya, and Zika. All three infections were. We had a very high incidence last year, last few months, about 5 months back. And the Zika virus is known to cause Guillain-Barré syndrome subsequently. Of course, the peak was almost 5 months back, but we know that Zika virus can linger on as a subclinical infection. So we have to keep that in mind. Then we have to keep in mind, because most of the cases are coming from Pimpri-Chinchwad and some clustering, some villages. They are on the outskirts of Pune, and these are industrial areas and agricultural areas. So many parts of the country has shown some water, deep water, groundwater contamination with arsenic. So this chemical poisons also can give rise to Guillain-Barré like syndrome, and diarrhea and gastroenteritis also arsenic can cause. I mean, these are remote possibilities we have to keep in mind because of the clustering. So I think they have taken samples for chemical examination. Let us see what are the results. And they are from some other parts of the country. In the northeast, there have been one case, two case. So those may be the normal occurrences. So, but we have to keep watch how it unfolds. So as on today, it is confined to Pune and some parts of Pune. So I mean,
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. I'll be keeping an eye on that, as I said, because if this continues to spread, it may suggest something else. Now, I just wanted to ask Sam's thought on something as we shift through this. Can you, in a simple way, explain to the audience what the relevance is of publications in the scientific world? Why generally is it considered to be important?
That's a very good question, with a very complex answer. There are many layers in it, but in essence, researchers that they need funding, and the only way to get funding is to see to it that you have sufficient publications. This costs money, but also throughout your career, and certainly in the West, you have these tenure track positions. So this means that you have, if you want to keep growing on the scale and becoming a full professor in the end, then it is needed to have a certain amount of publications. So there is a bit of pressure on researchers, and researchers quite often also feel pressurized within their own field, their own domain of research, because you want to be the first to discover something, or you want to be the first to show a novel result. So there are many angles to this that create a pressure on the researchers to keep publishing. It's either perish or publish. And certainly in the West, where there's a huge amount of competition. And this may lead, and we've seen this throughout the last 3-4 decades, that it every now and then it pops up in the scientific world that some kind of author, researcher, has to retract a lot of papers because they suddenly realize that a lot of what he has published didn't make sense, had methodological flaws, statistical data that don't match up. So every now and then we see this happening. It's nothing new, but what we've seen throughout the pandemic was a bit of an other kind of censorship that was put forward by the publishers because they wanted to keep a narrative going. But for most researchers, it really is a way to survive and to keep thriving within in that academic system. And there is one angle that I want to touch upon, that is that a lot of these fundings nowadays come from pharma industry or authorities that dare to steer the conclusions even of research. And we know that about 30 to 40% of the authors don't even mention their conflict of interests when publishing a paper. So there are a lot of angles to the story and a lot of potential biases that create an uncertainty within science, to say the
Yeah.
least.
Excellent. And so now, Amitav, I'm interested because you are also on the other side in the sense that you are an editor of a paper or publication. Now, what I need you to clarify is what is the difference between the paid and the unpaid kind of publications, and how does that industry work generally?
That is a good question because of late there are a lot of open access which was not there earlier. I will just briefly explain. Earlier, it was most of the journals were had to be purchased, and the reader had to pay, or the institution libraries used to purchase them, or individual contributors. Whoever wants to read the journal has to pay, and that was how the journal sustained itself financially. Then, of course, when the online journals came, then also that same model. If you want to read an article, even now, those are the closed access where the reader has to pay something to access the full article. And that was increasingly the open access journal came, although I think more than a decade or couple of decades, where the author pays the money instead of the reader. It is open access means that anybody have access to it. It is online, or it is online. You can have hard copies also, print copies, but online anybody can get the full paper, and the money is recovered from the authors pay model. So that is called open access, and that open access has also got uh, two varieties. One is the open access, that is the green open access where the author pays, and the platinum open access is where some institution pays, like all institutional journal, medical journal of DY Patil Vidyapeeth. Neither the author pays, neither reader pays. The institution is paying for the charges, publishing charges, printing charges, everything. The As an institution, as an academic input, as a contribution to academics, so our institution is providing a platform for exchange of research and scientific communication. So that is supposed to be the highest model where there is no conflict of interest, because when the authors are paying, there is a conflict of interest at the editors or the publishers. The more articles they accept, they get the more the revenue, more revenue. So once the author pays heavily, some of the open access journals charge very heavily. Once the author pays heavily, there is a conflict of interest to accept that paper, even of mediocre quality. So that is one thing. So these are the ways where the publication, there is a concern that the open access had led to many predatory journals also, that they are just publishing anything for money. And so that compromised the quality of publishing. But now the indexing bodies, there are standard indexing bodies like Web of Science, PubMed, and Scopus. These are the standard ones. They are very particular of indexing only good quality journals. So there is some cleanup of the system. The open access journals also, there is a strict criteria for them to get into this indexing bodies. If they do not follow the quality publication, so they do not have a chance to. So this is one way to ensure that once the indexing bodies are keeping a tag on the quality of publication, so we can be assured of at least some uh, credibility in scientific research.
Now, this is very important to maintain the credibility and to maintain the standards of research and so on, and all very good. However, it then leads to potentially an inherent bias where authors or scientists will only focus on science that they think is going to be published. How does that feel from the scientific end? Any idea about that, Sam?
No, I think indeed that's true. It's easier to put a publication forward on a subject that is currently a hype, or where you already have a lot of publications, so it's on a certain topic, then it's easier just to follow that lead and reproduce more or less the same outcomes. Inherently, that is a huge issue, because what Professor Banerjee just mentioned is important, that we have some kind of at least quality check on the papers published. And I hear now that Scopus, PubMed, Medline have some kind of algorithm to at least have the decent publications on top of the list. But I also know, on the contrary, that a lot of researchers use Google Scholar. And the thing is, what I've noticed by testing Google Scholar, that if you search for a certain subject, you will always find the first 10 pages are all the articles that are either sponsored by pharma industry or come to the same conclusion. And you have to go to pages 30 and 40 to find contradicting views that might have better methodological basis and sound data than the ones on the first 10 pages, but they're not shown. And what you get is a reproduction of set beliefs, because if I'm a novel researcher, what will I do? I need papers to substantiate what I'm writing. If I use Google Scholar, for instance, and I get the first 10 articles and they all come to the same conclusion, then I assume as a novel researcher that this is the case, and I'll use that to build my article. So there is not only an inherent bias, there is a manipulation of reality going on. And I think a lot of novel researchers should be aware of this, because it's a trap. It's a real trap. And you also see, if you go to Medline, PubMed, Scopus, or other databases, and you search for, you use the same Boolean phrases or the same search terms. And as you use in Google, you get completely different results. And so it's not easy nowadays to falsify or the data or research as such. Certainly not if you're a young researcher and you don't have a lot of experience. It's a system that keeps itself going by recreating the same narrative all over again, which eventually leads to, there was a very good study done in 2016, and it was a Cochrane review. And the Cochrane review looked at the efficiency of vaccinating healthcare professionals for influenza, and to check if this was a good way to protect the patients in clinics, hospitals, etc., etc. So vaccinating healthcare professionals, and the outcome was, do we have less transmissions within the hospital, certainly towards patients, etc. The conclusion was that there were 1,589 articles published on the efficiency of vaccinating healthcare workers that all came to the conclusion that it was a superb method and great results. Until that Cochrane started looking at all the data and all these 1,589 papers, and what they saw was that all these papers referred to 4 papers that were initially published between 1998 and 2004. And these 4 papers were used, those data, as the basis where all the other researchers published, the 1,500 plus research papers were based themselves on the initial data of those 4 initial papers that ever were produced on this topic. Cochrane looked into these data of these 4 first papers. They were all wrong, full of methodological flaws, and the data didn't add up. Consequently, the 1,500 other publications that used the first four ones as a start point were all fraudless, not by intention, but by just following that lead all the time. So we have to stay vigilant, I think, as scientists, researchers, that we keep an open view and not always accept the so-called consensus.
Very important point. And Amitav, I'm going to pull you out of your current editor of the journal. I'm going to put you in terms of in lead of one of the top journals now, say Nature or Lancet or something. These journals make their money largely from contribution from industry and so on. How can you remain objective in that kind of scenario?
It's very difficult, Philip. Even I think about 2 decades back, the editors of Lancet, BMJ, and other top journals, they wrote a combined editorial. It included Richard Houghton, the present editor of Lancet, Richard Smith, editor of BMJ. They wrote an editorial which brought out how the pharmaceutical lobby is influencing science, and the amount of money these journals get from reprints. And so, to that extent, they said this medical journals nowadays have become the extension arm of the pharma industry. So, these are the words in that editorial, and it's how the scientific research, because more and more funding are coming from these companies, and as Sam brought out that researchers, they require grants, they require publications, and once they get grants from the pharma industry, the hypothesis or the outcome is already decided, and the researcher has to just fill in the blanks. And if the outcome is not favorable to the pharma interest, the researcher will not get the grant next time. So there is an indirect pressure, and this has been admitted by editors of, as you said, Lancet. The real editors of Lancet, they are aware of it, but I suppose they are helpless, because that is how things are going. Besides, as it is, most research have got their methodological flaws, which are difficult to almost eliminate always. As even John Ioannidis had also brought out earlier, that most of the 50% of the scientific papers may not be reliable, not because of any deliberate dishonesty, but because of the uncertainties in the medical field, incomplete data, other biases, sampling biases, then human variations. And if you add to that this influence of extraneous influences like profit of pharma, and if they want a certain results, then it becomes, I mean, one loses the trust, whether we can trust all the papers, even in good journals.
That's a really, really big topic here, because it sounds as though what both of you are saying is that there was an illness in the industry beforehand. And then when you have a COVID pandemic where there are financial interests around, say, the production and the support of vaccines and the like, this has become significantly exacerbated because there are so many factors that need to be fed. You know, you have an industry that needs to promote a particular intervention. They would want this to continue long term. They need the public to trust that all the science is supporting it. And so there would be tremendous pressure on these, because nobody at the start of the pandemic, everybody was just talking about it has to be peer reviewed, it has to be published in a top journal. If it's not, it's irrelevant, don't listen to it. And so suddenly, if you have that kind of pressure being applied across the board, then that pressure has to be going right to the top of these publications. It's Sam, based on what you have seen in the COVID pandemic, what are your thoughts about where things were before, and did it get worse with the pandemic?
Absolutely. Yeah. Became much worse. I think it became worse. That's one aspect, but it became also more visible. Visible for the general public that wasn't aware about how peer-reviewed science worked. It opened up a lot for the masses. They got a bit of an understanding how science is created or how it works. However, we see, and I've noticed it myself as well. Did research with two colleagues I did a cost-benefit analysis on the mental health status of the Belgian population based on the 72 first days of the first lockdown during COVID. And we wanted to calculate how much it would cost the government to remediate the mental health issues within the population. We couldn't get it published because it touched upon a topic that every editor refused. It was like, yeah, but we cannot bring this, and people would start panicking. And so this was obvious. Colleagues of mine at the Radboud University in Nijmegen in 21 published a very decent, very well methodologically sound, good data a publication on, I think, the first publication on the potential side effects of a Pfizer vaccine, mRNA-based, on the adaptive and innate immune system. I was flabbergasted when I saw the data. I was flabbergasted when I saw the results. Well, they tried hundreds and hundreds of journals. Nobody wanted to publish it. They all got some kind of a strange explanation why they didn't want to publish it. So it became apparent during the pandemic that what already was growing through the scientific field became exacerbated. It became it went out of control, and we have seen the same thing in Nature. And there was a paper published in Nature about 2-3 years ago on the origins of the virus, COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2. And it was clearly stated, and it was in Nature, so clearly stated that there was little to no possibility that it was a lab leak. It was a zoonotic transfer. What happened yesterday? Finally, what was already brewing in the background, that the CIA report in the US claimed that most potentially, they're most sure of the fact that it is a lab leak and not a zoonotic transfer. What happened yesterday, finally Trump's press secretary stated literally that the CIA report is basically very clear that it's not a zoonotic transfer. But the Nature paper is still there, has been attacked by a lot of peers of ours that said doesn't make sense. You are not addressing all the potential variables. So you see the bias within the journals, you see the bias within researchers or state-appointed experts, depending on the job they have and they want to safeguard. So it's a huge issue, and I think my personal opinion or my personal vision on this is that the only way to address this issue is to reform the funding of journals totally.
That's an important point. Amitav, one of the things that did concern me was a paper that had been published. I can't remember which journal it was published in India. It was an Indian authors. And they did a piece of research that is flabbergasting to me that hasn't actually been done in great detail. And the question is a very simple one, which is for frontline workers who faced the virus and so up until the middle of 2021 had survived or working with patients who would therefore have had exposure and natural immunity. How did their outcomes compare between those who say were unvaccinated and those who then had a vaccine versus those who didn't have exposure because they were isolated and then vaccinated? A very, very important data. Now, what I remember seeing with this paper is that it showed that those who were initially infected and then vaccinated had worse outcomes than those who didn't. These are longer term all cause mortality. And then that paper had to be retracted because it was stated that the data was flawed. And so that paper can't be found now, and it's now disappeared. What are your thoughts? Do you know anything about that, and any thoughts from an editorial point of view as to how that
Uh,
kind of retraction works?
Yeah, Philip, what you are saying is the paper you mentioned first was about the vaccinated healthcare workers and unvaccinated. That there was a paper like that, but that did not catch much attention because it was a case control study, I think, and it wasn't published in a very high journal with very great wide readership. So it didn't. I don't think that paper received much of a problem. But what I think you are getting mixed up, it was another paper which was a follow up. This was really a big study. They followed up more than 1,000 people who had taken the COVAX vaccine. They followed them up from. It was a paper published by Banaras Hindu University. It's a good university in India, and the authors they followed up the patient. They did a telephonic survey for more than 1.5 years, and they just recorded the adverse events of significance. Adverse events of significance. It was a telephonic interview. It was a narrative. It was a cohort. So that paper, the publisher, the vaccine manufacturer initiated legal proceedings against the authors and against the journal also. That journal was, I think, a drug safety journal. It had a fairly good impact factor, above 2. So it was a paper which they came down heavily on the authors. They came down heavily on the journal also. And the unfortunately, our Indian Council of Medical Research, which is supposed to be the highest research body in India, they also came down heavily on the authors and on the, yes. So this was unfortunate, and the paper was ultimately the journal came under pressure, and the paper got retracted from the journal, which is quite unusual. I mean, the as an editor, the retraction of paper is a long procedure. You have to really establish either fraud, either data fabrication or manipulation, then or plagiarism. They are otherwise if whatever the paper on the grounds they started pressurizing the journal and the authors, the grounds were quite flimsy because they said this study did not have a control group. So they had not claimed that it has a control group. It was a cohort study. They could have assembled a control group and compared the adverse events with any control group. Could have been any time. The researchers could have taken the study forward. Secondly, they say it was a telephonic interview. So anyway, that also could be confirmed subsequently. Those ICMR could have traced those participants and confirmed the findings. In fact, the study done by the pharma company, that manufacturer, and the ICMR itself also used in their trial, they also used telephonic interviews, and their sample size was much less. So these workers had done a fairly good study. I mean, it was not a perfect study. I mean, all studies have got their flaws, but it wasn't research misconduct. It wasn't data fabrication. It wasn't plagiarism. So there was no ground for a honest retraction. But they came under pressure. So this is unfortunate. This is deterrence to researchers not to take up controversial topics. In fact, controversial topics are the very topics where research is required. And if this type of deterrence is there, the struggling researchers will never attempt, and this is unfortunate. I mean, it will have a ripple effect.
Yeah, this is the reality, and a lot of people don't realize that research oftentimes is not done, not because people don't have a question about it, but because one, they either can't get the funding for it, or even if they did the research, they can't get it published. And so, therefore, it would be fundamentally a waste of their time and valuable money, and reflect poorly on their career. So, we have this very strange situation now because, as I said, we need researchers to really analyze this pandemic, the outcomes. They have to be objective. There is no doubt that where we are now is not at all what anybody could have anticipated in 2021. And so, therefore, there has to be an objective analysis now to say, okay, we are seeing lots of unusual patterns of disease. Lots of people are unwell. There are multiple things going on. How much of this is potentially related to, as I say, the intervention or the elephant in the room? But nobody will want to try and do that kind of research. How in the world, Sam, are we supposed to try and move this forward?
I don't have a clear answer to that. I'm afraid. Or you should find some philanthropic funding and gather some independent researchers, and then you might have a potential team that can start digging into this. But if it comes through the official channels like universities, governments, if the funding comes from institutes, government-steered institutes, European Commission, you name it, then no one will dare to touch that subject. So I think the only way forward, and in general, for concerning publications in science, is that we need to rethink the model. How science is being funded, how academia has been funded. Up until the 60s, it was governments primarily that funded research institutes, universities, etc., research centers. And that all changed during the 70s, 80s, a bit led by the US, that started by allowing industry to fund research. And that's where everything started going wrong, in my opinion. So the only way to retrieve the essence of science is to cut all these kinds of fundings. And a colleague and myself once did a financial analysis to check what it costs to publish papers. And we were flabbergasted as well by seeing the real life figures in front of us. You don't need much money, All these journals are currently incorporated in a few big publishers on earth, and they want to make huge amounts of money. But I can tell you that if our author contributes 50 euros per author on a paper, and you give the general public access to these papers by paying also 50 euros for a whole year to check all these papers that have been peer-reviewed and published on your website, then you still make a lot of money. So I think that's the essence. We need independent research more than ever, and certainly if we want to tackle topics that the classical publishers don't really like to see. If you challenge certain paradigms, set beliefs, it's very difficult to get your paper published. I remember last year, Joanna Moncrief with her research team had a huge amount of pressure and publishing a paper on serotonin, SSRI, the pills that we mostly give to patients with depression, the serotonin theory. Well, she did research on 20 years of publications, and the end conclusion is that the theory is even faulty. So we're addressing the serotonin problem, while serotonin is not even the cause of depression, the primary cause. It took her, I think, 1 year and a half, 2 years to find a publisher. Yeah.
This is serious stuff. And I still struggle with the model, Amitav, with regards to I have sat down, I have done a year and a half of research. I then put together a paper, which is detailed, looking at the science, giving valuable information. then I have to pay a publisher to put it out. That publisher then puts it behind a paywall so that after all that work, only people who have paid for it can see it. And I get nothing for it. And the peer reviewers are often not paid either. What is that? If you took it out of the medical publication and just put it in general authorship, does that make any sense?
Yeah, there are certain repositories like institutions can have the publications they can put up. Uh, I mean, the journals may not last as a best source of scientific information if this deterioration continues. And people are losing trust in it. And since there are serious conflicts of interest, so honest researchers may have to find ways to communicate their research in different ways by more transparency, access to the raw data, access to all parts of the research funding, and declaration of conflicts of interest, and without any profit motive. I think that can come, as Sam said, it doesn't take much money nowadays with the online media to disseminate your findings. So, and this peer review also gives you a false sense of, validity, because peer reviews are also biased. It depends on chance which peer reviewers you. As an editor, I have seen two peer reviewers may accept it, two may reject it, the same paper, and they may be just contradictory. So it depends on the your luck. It's more of a gamble on the way. And peer reviewers also they go with the consensus, most of the peer reviewers. So anything, if you are trying to push the envelope, if an author is trying to push the envelope, he or she may not find favor with the peer reviewer. So it also gives you a, as if this is the scientific journals, and and it's and this type of retraction. And if you remember, a paper from Lancet also had to be retracted, that hydroxychloroquine study, which was on turned out to be on false data, spurious data. The data was out. Most of the things are now outsourced. Big research, the data is outsourced, the analysis is outsourced, and all those are there are third parties who take care of your research, those funded by pharma and other things. And most academicians may be just ghost authors, or that type of thing, gift authors. So that type of things also has come into this science publication. So there are a lot of gray zones.
Yeah, this is some serious stuff because, as I said, when you reflect now, after 4 years of using an intervention, and that for the general public, it's not blatantly obvious to them where all the benefits are, and they are scratching their heads saying, "Well, if this is so great, why does it not look like that? What am I missing?" I think I'd sometimes pull back and I think about it. It's kind of like, i- imagine seeing measles cases everywhere, and you are saying that the measles intervention is great. It just doesn't fit. And I think that this is the kind of disconnect that we're getting, where the public is really thinking these guys are living in a glass house. They can't observe. Is this completely damaging the fundamental views of science?
Definitely, this is something which is very unfortunate. I mean, really unfortunate. This is the, I mean, then there are all types of other people with vested interest. There is a rebound to different types of, say, alternative medicines, which may be even less scientific. People on the rebound may go the other way, and it does cause harm, which are not been fully researched. And now research also is a question mark if there are so many conflicts of interest. And it starts with the academicians also, because they are under so much pressure to publish. and to get grants, that they may just take shortcuts and compromise. I mean, desperation, out of desperation, to just retain the career and tenure. So it's a nexus which has just willy-nilly everybody has got involved in this, and so
Yeah. I just
It's,
want
it,
to
it,
show.
it has become it
Go
has
on.
become mainstream as well,
Mhm.
yeah.
within science, the scientific community just accept this as well. I give you a small example. 2020, where we were locked down, I was still head of research, and I was invited online for the new fundings provided by the EU government for the next 4 years. So all my colleagues from around the globe were visiting online, and we were following all these workshops. And it's no joke, but after every workshop on the provided funding through the EU government, every presenter ended with the same line. And that was, if you can provide us the outcomes that you expect in your filing of your grant, then we'll look into that. So basically what they were stating was, give us the answers that we need, write it already down in your grant, that this is what you expect to find, and then we will grant you the money. So I went to my director of research at my college and I said, what is this? So I might as well just write a conclusion and say, this is what you want to hear. Sit back and relax with my researchers for 4 or 5 years, get paid for doing nothing. And she looked at me and she said, I know. That's how it works nowadays. And I was like, this can't be true. So it's even accepted within the community that this is the way forward, that you already know that this organization or this authority or this funder wants or expects this outcome. So you're going to work towards that, just to have a job and to have an income. And so this is how far it has. It's a nexus where you can't fall any lower. This is we've hit rock bottom now, in my opinion. So the only way is up, and we have to rethink the whole model. And that's the only solution if we want to regain trust within the global community. We need to rethink the model that we are currently using, the scientific method. We have to restudy, and the way it's being funded. We have to have a totally different outlook on that as well, because if we don't scrap the way it's working today, science will not regain trust.
I'm going to put something here that somebody has put up, and I'll ask any of you to take this on. This is a question. What do you think about AI, artificial intelligence reviews?
Oh, I would love to answer that. In my opinion, AI and medicine is a bad match. And the reason is very simple, because AI is being fed by their producers with the information that is available. So if they put in all the current data that support the set beliefs and narratives we hear every day, then the outcome of that AI will just reproduce that. So everything in biomedical sciences is based on the Gaussian curve. There is only one person in 100 that fits that average. But all these data from publications publish averages as outcomes. So that means that 99% of the people don't fit that average. You have that with high blood pressure, you have that with everything. You can say, okay, the high blood pressure starts from a systolic pressure of 13 or 130, depending on the country where you live. But that's arbitrary, because you have so many. You might have a family of people that all have 14 or 15 as a regular normal blood pressure, because that's their genetic predisposition. So if you put this data into an AI machine and you say 13 is the limit, then everyone will be squeezed towards that average, and no one will have an individualized treatment plan. So I don't believe in this. It won't work. Trust me freely. It will lead to a lot of massacres, AI and medicine. Certainly, we overestimate the capacities of AI. that we have today. Maybe it's possible in the future, but even then, all the social determinants of health and all the variables that play within disease, you can never put that in an AI system. The AI system doesn't know you as a person, doesn't know what you're going through at home, doesn't know where you work, that you work in a dusty environment, that you have problems at home with your children, that creates mental pressure. An AI system will never know that. So if you trust AI and medicine, in my opinion, then as a health professional, I'm afraid you're not doing the best you can for your patient.
Any thoughts on it, Amitav?
Is right. Sam is right. AI can be used for repetitive tasks, which are routine tasks. But the outliers, which requires your judgment, which requires the art of medicine, for that you require judgment of an experienced clinician or an experienced doctor. Unfortunately, I don't know where the doctors will get the experience for, because medical students also are just going distance learning, or they closed the medical schools during the pandemic. So and they are also doing distance learning. So I think we are killing the art of medicine, and we are fragmenting the science of medicine both ways, because AI treats the human body like a machine. We are not machines. Each one has got a lot of diversity, variations, racial, ethnic, and other things. So as Sam very rightly said, AI may be good for automobile industry, but not for medical industry, perhaps.
So, when some people may be very upset that we're speaking about this because we are, in their minds, contributing to the lack of trust in the public arena. And as I show you here, this is a comment that somebody has just said: you can't trust 95% or more of doctors. Um, should we not speak about these things and try and fix these things internally? Is it right to open up the questions and reveal the dirty secrets, the dirty laundry in the public's eye? Is that counterproductive?
It's a difficult one. I have fought with this dilemma for a long time, and I tend to speak out more now. Why? Because we may not forget that in many cases, like for instance statins, where Dr. Asim Malhotra is one of the big proponents to show the evidence that we already have for 20 years, that statins don't contribute in the primary prevention of cardiovascular risks. Should we communicate this or not? In my opinion, in the beginning, I was a bit wary, and I was like, maybe it's not a good idea because people will lose trust. But on the other hand, the side effects created by statins, I think people have the moral right to know that a lot of drugs we have today are either not beneficial, not as efficient as stated, and may produce side effects. And people have been unaware of this for a long time, and I think they need to know. They have a right to know. It's their body. It's a part of the informed consent. And we see the same with proton pump inhibitors for people at home. Those are the pills you swallow if you have a bit of a stomach upset. And then we know if you take these, there are a lot of studies showing, and that's the glass ceiling as well. If you have these decent studies, most of the time nobody reads them. But there are quite some studies, decent studies, that have found that if you take these proton pump inhibitors for a longer period than 3 months on a row, there is a huge association with the development of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, Lewy body syndrome, etc., etc. So, shouldn't we tell this to the people? This has a huge impact on their potential healthy life years within their life expectancy.
Very good point. And Amitav, what do you think of this here? Trust does not come from false perfection. How do you address that looking at the issues with trust and publications? Do we talk openly about the failures of science?
Certainly, we should admit that there is always trial and error in science, and the failure should not be taken as a, I mean, failure should be taken as an opportunity to move forward and learn from it and move forward. And they are, given so many vested interest. So many profit motive, pharmaceutical. The journals also have entered into the profit game now. I mean, it's not only pharma, the academicians also career. The conflict of interest may not be always financial, it may be career promotion. That also. So given all this, I think we have to cut down on the rat race. Earlier it was individual rat race. Now the institutions are also going for global rankings, and for that ranking they require large number of publications. So it has become a mean by itself. It is not, end by itself. Earlier publication was a means to inform the scientific community and the public at large of your findings which can benefit humanity. So now that goal of publication is lost, the research is lost. The research is for self profit, to advance one's career, and that is about all. And with that in mind, the research, if it is flawed, it doesn't benefit humanity. So we have to change the system of this accreditation or ranking of colleges, ranking, because I have been in academia. I know how this is a lot of pressure not only on individuals but on institutions also to rise up in global rankings, which are based on this sort of currency of publications. So they are interested only in numbers, not in the quality of research, not on the authenticity of research. So everybody has gone into this, and they are the people, journals who are promoting any type of research. Then they are the pharma industry. They are promoting their own interest. So all this adds up, and the adverse impact of this is more than the sum total of all these conflicts of interest. So we have to abandon the system of it's a difficult to catch. The momentum is so fast, it is really difficult to stop this, but we have to think. The academic bodies should think, the accreditation bodies should think, this is causing more harm than benefit, and we are getting the spurious ranking, because now the even in medical schools the clinical work and teaching takes a backseat. Everybody goes for promotion of writing papers or research and maximum publication metrics, and then they indulge in questionable practices. So it is losing its meaning. The research should be good. It may not be in quantity but in quality. So for that, this measuring metrics, using the metrics for individuals as well as for institutions, this should be abandoned by the, some global accreditation body or ranking body. So it's a lot of overall is required.
Yeah, I think that these are very serious times because, as I often say, I think that fundamentally, after the pandemic, and certainly when we add in the impact of the change in physiology from various interventions during the pandemic, a lot of the way how the human immune system functions has changed. The clotting system has changed. And so, therefore, much of what we thought was good science may have to all be redone for us to be able to confidently say, okay, this medication is going to work in this way at this dose. It's almost as if we have to go back to the basics and redo the science. And if we're doing that, we have to do it on a foundation of a solid, open, genuinely searching for answers kind of scientific model. Imagine that as we come to the close here, imagine that RFK gets confirmed and he is trying to bring changes to the system. He pulls you in. We'll start with you, Amitav, and then we'll do Sam. He pulls you in, Amitav, and he says, listen, I want you to help me build a model for the US which will be applicable for the rest of the world. What do you think, Amitav, could be something that would be future proofed to bring about a health revolution where we really are getting back to the fundamentals of science?
Very good question, because health, you mentioned the word health, and Robert Kennedy also mentions the word health. Actually, even the World Health Organization had forgotten the word health. They are mostly focusing on treatment and pharmaceuticals. And so I would really, I would advise him to do more research on healthy living, health promotion, and as his agenda also. And we know that this obesity is a major problem, and this ultra processed food habits, sedentary lifestyle. More research should be uh, funded for these things rather than finding the treatment. Treatment also we require research, but that should be really at the second priority. But how to maintain health? Because most I was reading recently, they, instead of tackling obesity by changing lifestyle, exercise and food habits, a new specialty has come in America which is known as obesity medicine, that by pharmacological interventions they will take care of obesity. So this is of course there may be some patients who may require, but it should not become the norm. Because if the research direction and the funding direction is only towards pharmaceuticals, the everything would be medicalized. The normal say health or lifestyle or diet, that will take a, people are becoming more and more passive. They think the pharmacological solutions for things which they can modify themselves to preserve the health and promote the health. So that I would advise that way.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amitav. And Sam, what about you? He pulls you in, says, "What do we do?" Where would you tell him to go?
I think that's indeed. Can only cite what Amitav has just stated. It's we need to shift from disease care to healthcare. And currently, we're not doing healthcare. We do disease care. We wait until people get in trouble, and then we start remediating the problem. And most of the times, not even the root cause. We're just treating the symptoms. So I think we should, instead of having 10% of the budget going to preventative medicine, I think it should switch totally from 90% preventative medicine, and wherein you have a close relationship with your physician, and that the physician really can start guiding you towards good health. But people have been made dependent by the pharma industry and think a pill will solve all the problems, and it's not true. And even if you take something for, let's say, obesity in this case, it will have side effects on the rest of your body because you're disturbing your natural symbiosis, your natural balance. Every time you take in a chemical, it will enhance, deplete, inhibit, or facilitate something. But this is a chain of events that follows that disturbs your natural pattern. So I agree with Amitav. 90% preventative medicine, 10% curative, and then it needs a total shift, a total overhaul. But I question if RFK will succeed in it. To be honest, you don't forget you have the FDA, CDC. They're full of civil servants that have been following the narrative for 30 years, maybe. You have these influences and pressure of big pharma. You only have a legislature term of about 4 years, I think. So how? Yeah, I hope for the best, and I'm quite sure he's the best person. He's the right man at the right place and the right time, I think. But he faces a huge challenge, and I'm not so sure it will be a walk in the park for him. So I just cross my fingers. Yeah.
Wonderful. Really appreciate you guys coming on here. And I think this has been a lovely overview as to some of the challenges that exist. And I know the audience appreciated it. So thank you, everyone who's been with us across the various platforms. And we look forward to bringing you more information in the near future. So thank you, Sam. Thank you, Amital. I know it's
Thank you.
late for you there, but if you just hold on a few minutes until after the outro, I'd appreciate that. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Bye bye.